And against, carried. Next item is time of use charging, the options shortlist for going out for public engagement. Just want to acknowledge and thank the staff for the workshops last week. We had 13 of the councillors there, and it was a great opportunity, and the feedback was really positive from both those who attended and the staff, in enabling us to get our heads around the options, the why, the wherefore, how they work, what's gone on before. Incredibly important for us to be able to make decent informed decisions on these sorts of things. So, and just also want to thank you for the offer to spend one-on-one time with those who weren't able to. I'm not sure how many took you up. There was 0 on Friday, and it looks like it was 0 today, as of today. But want to thank you and the team for offering that opportunity for a one-on-one. Reminder, this is about going out for public consultation and with some options and seeing what the public think. So about an issue that we hear consistently is one of our biggest. So hand over to you, Hamish.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name's Hamish Bunn. I'm the time of use charging project lead for Auckland Council. Today I'm joined by Graham Gunthorpe, who's the project director, and Jeff Valenzuela, who's our comms and engagement specialist. I'm still working on getting that pronunciation right. So, as you've said, the purpose of today is to seek approval for a short list of 3 options that we'd like to take to public engagement. It's not consultation at this stage, that comes later. And also agreement to the communications and engagement approach, particularly that public engagement in November 2026. So in terms of the introduction and the background here, really we've been continuing to deliver on the request from the 2023 November decision from this committee to progress time of use charging as soon as practicable. That's been the background and the kind of guidance that we're following through here, and that's been the reason for the project. In terms of context, why time of use charging? I think we're all aware of Auckland's congestion problems. Everybody's aware of the delay, the frustration, the time wasted, and the fact that we need to build in a buffer to allow for the variability and travel time that comes with congestion. And those costs that congestion imposes on all Aucklanders have been estimated at around about $2.6 billion per year if you monetise it all. Now, one of the challenges that we have is although council is continuing to invest in transport infrastructure alongside government with the introduction of the likes of the City Rail and so on and so forth, we've still got the plus of being a city that's attractive, and it's a city that's got population growth coming forward, and unfortunately that means the congestion problem is not going to go away. Even as we invest, it's going to continue to get worse over time. So we really need some other tools in the toolbox. Now, what time of use charging does is it really reflects, it makes explicit those costs that everybody already has with a charge. And what that encourages people to do is think about their options and decide whether, hey, am I going to drive and pay the charge, or do I want to swap to public transport, or do I want to swap when I'm driving, to avoid that congestion or that charge. And what we get is some small reductions in travel, but these can have big impacts in terms of congestion reduction and reliability improvements. So that's really what we're chasing here with these potential options, is making these costs explicit and helping people to make decisions and therefore improve the performance of the network. And we know that these schemes, where they've been implemented overseas, such as London, New York, Stockholm, have succeeded in reducing congestion and improving performance. Now, in terms of the timeline that we're working to, this decision that we're seeking here today would give us approval to go forward to public engagement planned for November after the election, which would then inform a council decision on a preferred scheme option. We go forward with that, then we move into the statutory process, which would see a scheme board set up between council and NZTA with an independent chairperson. They would then develop up a final option, which we expect would be taken to the public for final consultation in late 2027, and then council gets to come back and decide whether they're going to ratify that final option. And then if the council does that, then it goes to the minister for final approval. And, you know, if that goes forward, then we'd look to have a scheme in place by around about 2030, 31. So we have been through a shortlisting process. We started off with 13, a broad, 13 options looking at different variations around Auckland. We shortlisted that down to 7 and brought that back to this committee last year or the year before, and now we're down to 3 options. And what's really happened over that process is we've ended up with 3 options that are sort of focused around central Auckland, and one of the reasons for that is that central Auckland's where you've got the best public transport alternatives, but it's also the area with the lowest proportion of trips by low-income households. So this is a key way that we've mitigated some of the potential sort of negative social impacts by focusing on the city centre where we're less likely to have those kinds of impacts. That's a key mitigation. Okay, so given that, how have we gone about setting illustrative charges? And I should say at this point they are illustrative because the final charges will be set by the scheme board. And the purpose that we've really applied here is we've been targeted largely removing congestion at the charging points. It's not about revenue, it's about ensuring that we get an optimal congestion reduction, and that's shaped the numbers that you see in this report. However, we have also applied an overlay of affordability and fairness in some of these considerations. So that's affected the sort of illustrative charge level we're proposing for the 3C core motorway options. The actual charges could be different in the end. It's a decision made by the scheme board, and there's still plenty of work to do on when the charges might apply. There's likely to be lower charges in the shoulder, things like that. That's work that will be done in the next phase. Okay, so to quickly run through the options, one of the options is the city centre cordon option, which would charge drivers coming into the city centre in the morning and outbound in the afternoon. It's picking up around about 3% of all trips. It's likely to have a sort of low to medium charge in the morning, around about sort of $3 to $4, perhaps around about 2 to 3 in the afternoon. And what we see out of that is a roughly 4-minute time saving for those people who pay, but 20% of the people who don't pay still get some sort of benefit in terms of a faster or more reliable trip. It's the smallest, simplest option with the best PT alternatives. In terms of the next option, City Fringe, that's building out from that city cordon, same concept, charged in the inbound and the outbound during the peaks. Potentially a higher charge, a medium level in the morning. And that's going to affect around about 5% of trips with a saving of around about 5 to 7 minutes. And again, we still see a lot of people who don't pay the charge get the benefit of a faster and more reliable trip. Again, we've got strong existing PT alternatives, but it's overall better performance in terms of congestion reduction. And then finally, this is the more complex, challenging, but has the biggest benefits. It's the core motorways and city centre option. This would charge if people drive on those core motorways, roughly between the Harbour Bridge, Point Chev and Mount Wellington, or across the city centre boundary. It's picking up around about 7% of trips. Here, in terms of the engagement, we're planning to use an illustrative charge at a sort of a medium level of around about $5. And on the motorways, that would give a time saving of between 7 and 12 minutes. So this one is really delivering some quite significant savings on the motorways, and we're reducing overall congestion average across the region at around about 13%. So a really big impact. And again, a lot of people who don't pay still get the benefits. So as part of all of these options, we're also working on what the supporting PT measures, complementary measures would be, and that information will be available as part of consultation. You've got an example there that, for example, with the 3C option, there is a lot of potential additional services that we'd propose to put in place here, so we're doing that work. And then as part of consultation, the engagement, I'll correct myself, we're doing further analysis on the social impacts, economic impacts, so that'll be available in November. Now I'll move on to Jeff to talk about the engagement approach.
Thanks, Hamish. So essentially we're also seeking approval of a communications and engagement approach, and to implement, to complement the shortlisted options, which would include a public engagement round in November. This would be a council-led engagement to deliver feedback from Aucklanders prior to the committee's decision-making on scheme initiation and preferred options. In addition, I guess we're just acknowledging that time of use charging is a very new concept for Aucklanders. So we also want to ensure that the program is working to raise awareness on what it is and why it's proposed, so that we can get the best, just the best possible input and feedback once we get to that engagement round. Essentially engagement would take place following the election and look to gain insights on key concepts of time of use charging, as well as the three options. And specifically, when we're thinking about kind of how we're framing and what the foundation is of what those public questions could look like, we're thinking about just understanding, better from Aucklanders the impact that congestion is having on their day-to-day life, what Aucklanders expect from time of use charging, also just kind of what they think about key aspects of the shortlisted options, in addition to insights on pricing, mitigations, equity, those types of things. And then lastly, we want local knowledge insights in terms of, again, the day-to-day impact of this proposal. And then essentially what we would do after that is, in that January-February timeframe, work to share an insights report with Aucklanders and the committee on the key learnings from that engagement period to again support that decision making later next year.
Thank you.
Thanks, team. Questions? Lotu.
Kia ora, Chair. I was just going to ask about the engagement plan, but you've sort of gone over most of that. So if you could just, I appreciate that you've mitigated some of the social factors by having it in the options in a much smaller area, focusing on the isthmus in central Auckland, but still disproportionately it'll be workers who don't have choice about when they can drive, when they can work, what hours they do, etc. So if you just wanted to talk a little bit more about your engagement plan to reach out to them, especially given that they're the ones who are least likely to engage with us in council as well. Kia ora.
No, absolutely, and I think it's important that although the options are largely city center based, that this is an Auckland-wide issue, and therefore we need to do Auckland-wide engagement and awareness building as part of that program. So we will certainly take a wide lens and certainly dedicate certain work streams to ensure that we're reaching out into communities. Utilizing community partners via Auckland Council to work with on the ground organizations to help us spread the word and make sure that the largest number of folks can participate in the engagement.
And thanks. Just to add to that, as I said, we'll be doing social, economic and Māori impacts analysis, and we'll be looking to engage stakeholders to shape up some of that work. And we're thinking about what we can do in terms of mitigations, for example, caps and whatever that may deal with the impacts of some of these things. So we're really looking to get a good sense of what these different options are going to mean for the community in terms of those kinds of impacts.
Kia ora, thanks. And I'm assuming that unions are included in that as stakeholders?
Yep, they'll be a part of that stakeholder cohort.
Kia ora. Thanks, Chair.
Thanks, Lotu. Ken.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I just heard you say it's an Auckland-wide issue. It's not really. It's a commuter-wide issue, isn't it? Like I used to work in the city many years ago. maps until I got elected, there was a three-decade gap there where I never came near the place. So it's only those people who are travelling in here that are going to be affected. Yeah?
Well, those are the ones who will potentially pay the charge, but Aucklanders outside of the charged area are still, generally speaking, likely to get some kind of benefit. So the effects will spread more widely, and we do know that people from all over Auckland do travel into the charged area. Although you're quite right, you know, the further south or west or north that you go, then it's the lower likelihood that people do come into the city centre area during the peak period. But yeah, congestion's Auckland-wide, and the effects will be wider than just the charged area.
Okay, I asked a couple of these questions quickly during the last workshop, but it was confidential, so I just, because we're in public, want to do it again. Tradies, you were talking about trades vehicles and stuff being exempt, especially those that drive through to Wardens backwards and forwards when they're going, you know, if you're travelling and you're having to travel across town, you could get clipped twice, correct?
No, I didn't say they're exempt. I said there might be a chance that they're able to claim those costs similar to they could claim their petrol. But
through
I'm
their
not
tax returns.
I'm not a tax expert. That would be up to the accountants.
Thank you. You've said there, how are you identifying, like you said 3 to 8% will get charged, but maybe up to 30% or something like that, 20% will have the effect. How do you identify that? How do we know who's getting charged in the morning? Surely they're just all driving down the road, bang, 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 bang. Or do you do number plate recognition or something?
Sorry, I should have prefaced it to say that number comes from modelling.
On a computer?
On a computer, yeah. That's the same, yes, on a big computer. But that's the same model that is used for assessment of, you know, all the major transport projects in Auckland, such as City Rail Link, Waitemata Harbour Crossing, you know, all the rest of it. So the data that we're using comes out of that modelling.
Okay, so there's also, you know, when we look at the maps, we're looking at the centre out kind of thing. It's where we're not looking at what's bringing them in, you know, their reasons for coming in. And the further out you get, the more nuanced those reasons are to all the different people. So would you agree that, you know, West Auckland, as far as the train goes, our park and rides are minuscule compared to the park and rides in the south and the ones being developed in the south? That's a qualifying matter, is it not?
I couldn't comment on qualifying matters. What I will say is, you know, West Auckland will get significant benefits from implementation of City Rail Link, you know, some really big time savings for travelling into the city centre. The Northwest Busway, you know, is being extremely successful. Some of our our complementary measure options would look to take the revenue from these schemes and put more money into enhancing those Northwestern Busway services. So we'd certainly look to be improving and building on the public transport options that are already there.
Yeah, I'd just like to add, we also recognise the importance of the Southwest Motorway in order to move between the south and the west, and we're not proposing to charge that, so that Western Ring Route will remain uncharged.
Okay, and acknowledging the chair saying that we have to be careful focusing just on our patch, but that's who's put me here. The people in West Auckland would answer your comments about the train by saying that there's 130 park and rides in New Lynn, there's about 100 at Swanson, there's only about the same at Sunnyvale. Getting to those areas by public transport in Langholm and all those areas at the moment, the buses have been terrible, unreliable. I was seen riding on trialled smaller buses that can do better services, etc. They're 3 or 4 years away. So, yeah, I think it would be fair to say that the reasons people have for maybe opposing this would be as many as there is people driving in, or those for agreeing with it, correct? In other words, commuters have a story to why they're commuting each day, and it's quite a complicated story sometimes and quite unique.
Absolutely. So that's, one of the reasons why we're going out to engagement is to get a sense of what those stories are. We've done our modelling work, we've done that, and we want to put those options out there, get the feedback from people about what they think, and then, if the council makes a decision to take a preferred option forward, we would be taking that feedback and saying, right, how can we make this option even better? How can we address the feedback that we've received? And then people will get another chance, at the final option, understand what it is, what's it going to do for them, and they can provide feedback about whether they like it or don't like it. So we're really keen on getting that feedback from West Aucklanders.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Chair, I have an amendment that I've forwarded to you.
Yep, we can, you can do that when we get to that part of the day. John Gillam.
Thank you. I've got a few questions here. First, are there any guarantees on how the revenue will be spent?
Yes, there are. The legislation requires that the revenue is spent on transport projects and services, and I'll attempt to paraphrase it, that are for trips into, out of and around the charging area. So reinvested in transport must be reinvested in transport and focused on supporting trips into and around the charging area.
Thank you. Next question. What's the plan for increasing public transport on day one to provide alternatives like other cities have done, and including on the motorway if option 3C is implemented?
So we've already done some work on public transport alternatives. Now, I need to say that the final decision about this depends on sort of advice from the scheme board and an investment agreement between council and government. But from our perspective, there's a couple of things that we want to address. First and foremost, for all of these options, we'll be making sure that those people who want to switch from driving to public transport as part of these options, there'd be capacity for them on the network. So we'll be making sure that that would be available under all options. Then with the likes of 3C, where there's additional revenue available, or the other options, if they turn out to be better than we're expecting, we'd be providing public transport alternatives for those trips, car trips that are particularly impacted by the charge, and also supporting improvements to the main rapid transit sort of network routes entering and leaving the city centre. So really focused on making sure that we're providing some great alternatives for people who don't want to drive.
But that's all as the scheme progresses, not from day one.
Oh no, I apologise. We'll be looking to have those services in on day one, particularly the ones needed to ensure capacity. And then it depends with 3C, where there's likely to be quite a significant net surplus, there may be opportunities to bring other big, sort of larger public transport projects forward, but we haven't done the work on that as yet.
Thank you. Now, your modelling uses the 2-hour peak hours, but the report says the scheme board could choose to include shoulder peak into peak charges. Can you just elaborate on that, please?
Yes, sure. I mean, yeah, as I said, the model is 2 hours, so we're going with that simplified assumption. But what you see in all the international schemes is that they generally have shoulder peaks, shoulder charges, which might be, say, half the main peak charge, and that's for a number of reasons. One of those is to make sure that you don't get weird sort of patterns where everybody, if you just had a hard 2-hour deadline, then people might wait, outside of the scheme area to drive in once it's finished. So you want to offer a graduated charge, and in fact that reflects the way that congestion works on the network, where it does taper off. So we're trying to tailor the charges as much as we can to the actual conditions on the road network, and making sure that we don't get sort of weird behaviour with motorists trying to sort of game the system, because that has been seen in overseas examples.
And sorry, that applies to the inter-peak as well?
Potentially. Obviously, it's time of use, and one of the things that we're encouraging people is to think about driving at different times of the day. However, we do know some parts of the network are congested, so we think there'll be a need to look at those potentially to ensure that we weren't just shifting a whole lot of trips out of the interpeak, out of the peak into the interpeak and creating problems, particularly on the southern motorway there. So I think that's an area where the scheme board will need to just have a look at that, probably at a lower charge level.
Okay, so the scheme board could introduce peak charges, shoulder peak charges into peak, and then you get into the next shoulder and the next peak. So it's pretty much the whole day they might choose to do that.
Well, I mean, potentially. I think there's quite a high threshold for any charging in the interpeak. And I expect that that's somewhere where you'd only want to be targeting, as I've said in the report, congestion if it was severe and regular. So as I say, high threshold for that.
Okay, now am I correct that those travelling to Auckland City Hospital or Starship Children's Hospital would be charged under option 1C and potentially under 3C?
Yes. So that's right, that those areas would be within Auckland City Hospital would be within the charging area there under those options. We recognise that that is one of the issues with those options. Obviously, that increases the expense, but it also means that people travelling there, particularly when you're in an emergency or when you want to see your loved ones, those people are going to have the benefit of a more reliable trip and a faster trip. And remember, it's only likely to apply during the peaks, with the exception that we just talked about.
Okay, now I understand from the workshop we had recently that businesses would be able to claim back the congestion charges as a business expense, like they do with road tolls. Is that correct?
That's not an assumption that we have made. We are not accountants. That would be up to the businesses to ascertain, but that may be something that they're able to do.
Okay, thank you. And will community nurses doing home visits, are they able to be exempt?
The legislation only allows for exemptions for emergency vehicles and subsidised public transport services. I'm not sure whether nurses doing community visits would fit within the emergency vehicles definition.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Sarah?
Thank you very much. It's great to see that the engagement strategy includes work with advisory panels and community partners. There was some great data came to some of the panels recently about the impact that the community partners work had in creating more equitable spread across ethnicity. In that case, though, I note that we still don't record participation by disability status. So that leads me on to my probably quite unsurprising question, which is, are we able to look at and sort of maybe put this in the context of some of that community partnership engagement, ring fencing some of the revenue to make public transport offerings more accessible to the sectors of society that struggle to use them at the moment. So I'm not just talking about wheelchair users here, but people who are blind or vision or have service animals or have intellectual disability and some of those kind of less obvious impairments. Is that discussion going to be part of that work with the advisory panels and the community partners?
I don't think we've quite got to this point yet, but certainly could be and should be after that feedback, that we'll want to engage with a whole range of community panels and stakeholders. And certainly, I mean, generally speaking, what we're trying to do with the complementary measures is identify those trips and those parts of those Aucklanders really that may be negatively impacted by this scheme, and then work to say, right, what can we do to mitigate those impacts as much as possible by the way that we invest the revenue over time. So it's certainly something we'll be looking at, and I know Auckland Transport's always working to improve public transport for people with disabilities and challenges in that space. And
just add that when it comes to ring fencing funds for any use, that is up to the agreement between council and government.
Cool. Yeah, I really recommend that that's part of the conversation with community partners and with the advisory panels, because there's a lot of really helpful lived experience there, and it's a bit different to the kind of ongoing BAU stuff with AT, because it's about the time of use charging specifically, and how I think there's probably some specific ways in which we can mitigate that, and that lived experience should be really helpful for that. So I'd really recommend that it's part of that engagement sort of from the off. My second question was, second and final, Chair, was that the numbers are great. Love all the stats about minutes saved and so forth. I wonder, and apologies if this is somewhere else and I just haven't seen it or have misinterpreted it, but is it possible that we can, as part of the engagement process, highlight the relationship between the minutes saved and the costs saved, so that it's easier to understand the, if not benefits, then the kind of give and take of that charging? So is there a kind of accepted dollar amount per minute spent driving a petrol car, for instance, that we could highlight in the engagement, so that it's easier to understand that you might see a financial benefit even if you are someone who's paying the charge, or not? I'm not sure. It would help me to understand as well. Is that something we can incorporate into the engagement?
Certainly, we have done analytical work on that to date. It's a bit of a complex beastie, but we'll continue to work to make it as simple as possible, and we can include that in the engagement material so people do get a sense of whether, you know, the time savings that they get from paying the charge exceed the value of the charge. And happily to say, you know, for an enormous amount of trips, depending on which option, you know, a lot of people do end up with a net benefit, and Auckland as a whole ends up with a net benefit.
Awesome. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Sarah. Desley.
Thank you very much. I want to just challenge you around point 33, because I think the engagement and communication around this is really important. And in the paper you say that worldwide, when you've put the scheme together and it's gone through consultation successfully, it's done what it said it was going to do, right? But then the same point talks about the fact that where it's failed is because people either didn't have public transport alternatives, saw it as a revenue raising opportunity, or regarded it as unfair. So I suppose what I'm saying, my question to you is, I don't have examples of cities that have gone out to consultation and failed. Have you looked at, so my question is, have you looked at the cities who have failed in doing this and their consultation around that, and make sure that we're not making the same mistakes?
We have, and two examples that come to mind are Edinburgh and Manchester, and what we've learned some key lessons from what could be interpreted as a lack of communication, and a kind of full explanation of the why and the how that contributed to that factor. So we certainly are. Conversely, you know, Singapore and London, for example, have some really good examples that we could learn from as well in how they approached comms and engagement in advance.
I'll just, Manchester, an interesting point. They didn't identify the stakeholder groups that would be the most opposed. In that case, it was horse floats, of all things, and it was a massive problem, and it was one of the key contributors to that. Edinburgh is seen as revenue, therefore it fell over as well before it even made it, saw it to the light of day.
Thanks. I think that's a key point, Chair. Let's learn from other people's successes and failures. And my second question is, remind me, I'm sorry if I've just forgotten, if you are moving through the city in one side and out the other, or up, you can't go anywhere else because the water's on the other side, but do you get charged still?
Under the approach that we've assumed, yes, you would, because if you're coming into the city, you're still contributing to congestion in that area, so it's sort of, from that perspective, fair that you pay the charge.
I suppose a follow-up question then, because I'm not sure what the alternate is to not going through if you want to get to the other side without sounding like a chicken who wanted to cross the road.
Well, I mean, in terms of alternative routes, I think, you know, our preference is that people generally don't divert, and so we've been careful to select options that minimise diversion, and we, quite often the value of paying the charge is that you get the time savings. So that's also going to encourage people to stay on route as well.
I get that. I was just asking if you had to, because you can't go around. You have to go through. Yeah.
Well, I mean, you could go around if it's the city centre, because there's options depending on where you're coming from. But we certainly, we don't want that. And one of the things that we would look to do is work out ways to, how can we structure the charge? What else can we do to mitigate the diversion impacts, which will be a key part of the analysis.
Thank you. Julie? No, sorry, Chris.
Oh, thank you. Mine sort of follows on from the question that the Deputy Mayor has posed, but I mean, this is not a new issue. Both Tohanare, Morris Williamson and myself can testify that we've been grappling with this and the concept of it for 30 odd years. So I'm very mindful that this isn't a necessary part. We are voluntarily looking to do this communication to help public understand. As part of that, and following on from Desley, what are you planning by way of communication to demonstrate that this is not just a revenue grab exercise, that this will bring regional benefits for everybody?
Well, I mean, hopefully you've seen some of that to date. I suppose the first part is that the way that we've, as I said, the way that we have tackled this whole approach and our approach to charge setting is to target what is the right charge that's going to reduce congestion, roughly at the charge point. So that has been, and that's consistent with, I should say, policy guidance from the council and the nature of the legislation. So that's the first impact. And then the second and third points are really that we're focusing on, here are the benefits to the region in terms of overall congestion reduction and time savings, and then the benefits to the drivers themselves. And finally, to say that, if there is net revenue, it's going to be reinvested into transport infrastructure and services that will improve things. But that is kind of, in the way that we've done the analysis, a little bit of a positive byproduct, but it certainly hasn't been our focus.
Thank you for that response, Hamish. And I mean, I support this, but I am also mindful that we have a public that probably has consultation fatigue on so many issues. And so while that is all logical, I think it needs some really sharp focus to demonstrate that this is not just about a revenue grab. And it's the elephant in the room and we need to confront it. So it would just be good that you are mindful of that as we go forward. Thank you.
Thank you. Julie?
Kia ora, thank you. I'm interested in whether in the information that we put up, we're going to look at the scope of the charge. So you've said here about I think you've called them illustrative charges, compared to car parking charges. The example's already been raised of Auckland City Hospital. Unfortunately, I've been a frequent visitor to Auckland City Hospital over the last 11 years, and car parking charge is far greater to drive there than what I think we're looking at here. So I think that's an important factor in giving people the context of the amounts and whether they would be likely to incur one or not for those kinds of trips. Are we considering that as part of the information?
It's certainly the sort of thing that we can put into the feedback point as we work it up in more detail. And so thank you. Yeah, that's a really useful guidance point. That's easy information to grab, and certainly you might be paying $5 or $4 or whatever to come into the city, and then paying $20 to park for the day. So yeah, really useful context.
Yeah, I'd say most all-day parking, not at the hospital specifically, but in the city centre is far in excess of $20. But it also hasn't gone up much since I was a university student in the late 1990s as well. So anyway, that's a whole other conversation. Sorry, Chair. The other thing I wanted to ask about, and it's really good, I appreciate the points that Councillor Patterson-Hamlin raised around those specific communities that we need to talk to. So what I want to understand as well is this is very much sort of an early days conversation with the community. Is there an opportunity here for people to be raising, hey, these are the things that I'm worried about, these are the things that might mitigate it, and then we can also, and I mean, some people won't know what might mitigate, but some people might have a view and they might be able to give us that feedback. That's all stuff we're going to capture here and going to collate that can inform the scheme board.
Absolutely, and Jeff, you can follow up on this, but totally one of the reasons that we wanted to do it now is to have the decision about the three options that we're shortlisting on, so we can start to engage with stakeholders in a bit more detail before the November engagement, and then we can shape some of those engagement materials to bring out the kind of examples that you've talked about with the comparison with parking, and address concerns that stakeholder and community groups are going to have. And then once we get that feedback from stakeholders and from Aucklanders, then if we go forward to the next stage, we can see, right, how can we design a scheme that's going to address and mitigate these concerns as much as possible? So it's extremely useful.
No, that's right. And Hamish makes a really good point that even in advance of the November round, there is a strong level of pre-engagement that we want to do with Mana Whenua, with advisory panels, really work with the community partners to ensure that once we get to November, we've got a really strong program. We've also had the benefit from doing 2 deliberative democracy programs throughout this journey, and to your point specifically about mitigations, accessibility, those types of issues. The feedback that we've received from those two programs have benefited us greatly in getting to the point that we are now, that I think make us even more prepared to go into this conversation in November.
And final question, Chair. Can you just remind me, are people going to be able to give a view on what they think the money should be spent on? Or is that just out of scope because of the way the government has set this up? Are we already directed as to what this has to be spent on? Because I think that will potentially have a bearing as to, the Deputy Mayor's point about, people can see a connection between I pay this and it pays for that. Is that something we're able to even ask people, or is it something we need to make clear actually, the way that this is legally designed means we don't have a say?
Sorry, the first thing is, and we definitely do have a say. So I think it'll be the scheme board that provides some of that advice as part of the overall scheme development. But the final decision on how any net revenue is used is a decision between, in our case, between council and government. So we very much have a say in shaping that up. And as I've said, we've already started to work on what some illustrative public transport alternatives could be for each of those options, and we're putting them out to the public. But yeah, absolutely, I think we'll be looking for feedback on the kinds of things that, where can we invest that would help to make the scheme work better, mitigate some of the potential negative impacts, and that way we can take that forward to the scheme board stage and really try to fine-tune the scheme's options to make them work better. So absolutely.
I think it's really important to understand one of the main goals of the engagement is to understand how congestion affects people right now. We're asking what the status quo is for them. Then we ask about how each of the options would affect them and what would need to be done, what kind of mitigations, complementary measures, additional bus services, whatever it may be, to really, value their opinion. It will help shape our advice to you.
Great, thanks very much, team.
Thanks, Julie. Shane.
Thank you. Just in line with Councillor Ferry's questions, we need to go to the public and give them that trade-off of here is what you're also getting positively out of all of this. So just on that, we'll probably be looking at things like new bus routes or more frequent routes where one exists. Will we also be looking at PT fare pricing?
Potentially. I'll be honest and say we haven't actually probably had time to give that the consideration that it deserves as part of this. I think there's only one of those options that really generates enough of that revenue to be able to look at fair pricing, and we need to do some work to say what's going to work better, the price or increased services. But yeah, that's absolutely something we can consider.
Yeah, that's great that you'd consider that. I'd really encourage that, because if we can make it cheaper for people to take buses than the congestion charge, that way, that's another good way of doing it. Anyway, I can talk about that again a bit later. We have a public transport system that has really improved a hell of a lot, and it will need to improve a lot more, right? But I think it's probably fair to say it's still best at funneling you into the central city, and places like the hospital maybe not so good to get you there. So would you be looking at things like putting on more buses to the hospital as mitigation measures for these kind of little issues that come up?
Absolutely. I mean, I think that's part of the feedback that we'll be looking for, and it's something that you can certainly address with some of the mitigations and complementary measures. So totally, that sort of thing is going to be really useful.
Cool. Just finally, thanks, Chair. I didn't see a climate impact assessment in the report. Could I just get you to provide comments on how these scheme proposals will affect our climate emissions?
I think we'd expect to see emissions reductions in the order of perhaps 1 or 2%. 2% may be a slight overstatement. And that sounds like a relatively small number, but in the context of things that we can do to reduce transport emissions, it's actually quite a big impact. So overall, we'd expect these schemes to be net positive because they're reducing the amount of car travel that's going on, then and they're reducing congestion, then we're going to get a reduction in tailpipe emissions.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Richard.
Kia ora. Thank you for this. I guess I know that some politicians and some media will try and make this scaremonger pretty loudly on this and say this is the worst thing that's ever happened while the consultation's going on. How are you going to try and rise above that to show that the attempt is to address a issue that people want addressed, and almost the payment is trying to address part of that massive issue? Because I ain't seeing a $30 billion rail tunnel built next year, 2030, 2040, to the shore. So how are you going to show that the charge is actually for this thing? So I heard a question, around the hospital. Like, what if that reduced your trip time to the hospital by half an hour, and that's really important? Or what if you're showing the overall congestion? To Deputy Mayor's question, you're being charged across the city, but it's taken you half the time or a lot less. I don't know, but how are you showing those things side by side? Because if people just think this is a charge for using the infrastructure they already have paid for.
Absolutely. I mean, everybody will focus on the charge in the first instance, but wherever possible, we also want to illustrate, and I think we've tried to do that there's going to be a significant saving to those individuals who pay the charge, and not only that, a saving to people outside of the charge area who are still going to benefit from the decongestion and more reliable trip impacts that are going to arise from this. So I think what we're expecting as part of the engagement material, we'll have maps that give a sense of the time savings that people are going to experience for various trip types, and we'll be really emphasising that, along with the improvements in public transport and alternative services, and in fact the speed increases for public transport users, existing public transport users as well. So there's a whole range of things that we expect to be able to bring to the public in November that really illustrate those benefits in terms of decongestion, time savings, and more reliable travel.
Thank you. And I guess you could go for days and days and days, but I imagine, are you what type of modelling, and I saw those graphs and maps the other day, from NZTA on some other issues, maybe the on-ramp signals and things. How can you show what say a 5 or 6% reduction in cars on, say, Esmond Road or Oniwa Road, what that actually might do to Lake Road in general, even if you're not, like if you're travelling to Takapuna? Because I imagine, like someone said the other day, this would be like having school holiday traffic most days. Like,
I think we're hoping that'll be better than school holiday traffic most days. But what we will do as part of the material, I should say better, in the charged area or approaching the charged area. We can't solve for all of Auckland, unfortunately, at this point. But in the engagement material, we're expecting to have things like, what's going to be the time savings on key arterial networks, those kinds of maps. So as much as possible to illustrate to Auckland as the benefits of this, and sometimes, where there's a little bit of a diversion occurring, there may be some negative impacts, and we need to be open about that. But the benefits of this in terms of improved speed and reliability across the arterial and public transport network, we'll really be looking to have material that brings out those benefits as part of the engagement.
And I know it's hard to use overseas examples because we're not like them, but like New York, for instance, are you able to show any sort of data, because there's more data coming through, of where people went? So it looks to me like a huge number of people went onto public transport that maybe could have, but they hadn't been. But obviously you've got some people who are delaying trips or carpooling or whatever. But it seems like the economy within New York City is actually improving, ticket sales to theatres, all those kind of things. So we didn't lose the people, but they're obviously, is there any way to show the co-benefits from other examples?
I think we need to be cautious when comparing New
New
York. However, Gothenburg is a small city in Sweden that has seen really positive results, similar size, similar kind of scheme design. So maybe some of those lessons can come through. What we also want to do is make sure we're not overwhelming the general public with information. Yes, we want to have all of these resources available, but we need to make sure that we're speaking to people at different levels depending on how much they want. So we're very carefully couching our engagement strategy with that. So the information's there when people want it.
And last question, I guess, will there be any discussion with, say, the citizens' assemblies, what other people's solutions are to congestion? Because, I mean, even where we have really good public transports, there's often, like on the shore, we're the highest public transport users in almost the country, but there's still congestion. So is there an ability through those, at least those citizen assembly processes, because you're a bit longer, more detailed, that we can be asking what are other people's ideas? Because apart from billions of dollars of transport, which I'd support, but we don't have the billions, what are the other options, I guess?
I guess we can do that, but there is the process of the 30-year plan and RLTP that are currently going on, and they, in some ways, are probably the better processes to ask those questions. I think where that's useful, though, is to give people a sense of, well, if it's not going to be time of use, what are the alternatives? We are continuing to invest in public transport as fast as we can. Road optimisation projects, NZTA has released their state highway motorway plan with optimisation, so giving them a sense of what's already in train, but then what the likely outcomes even with those things in place is, but where congestion, where time of use charging can also provide a benefit.
Okay, thank you. Mike.
You mentioned several times the cost of congestion. I've heard the figure or similar figures for some years now. I'm not sure what the basis of it is. 2.6 billion is in the report, and what you've been saying. Okay, so what I don't see in the various options is the reduction of this alleged cost of congestion and loss of productivity, that how that would reduce this 2.6 billion. So have you any idea how much of this alleged 2.6 billion, it may be pinpointly accurate, but I haven't seen the basis of it. I've heard a lot of talk about it. So how will the scheme reduce the cost of this 2.6 billion? How much by? You got any idea?
We're having work done as part of this next phase that'll look at the economic impacts and including cost to benefit. I can't remember exactly how that 2.6 billion was calculated, but what we can say, and the numbers that we've given you today, give you a sense of the reduction in peak period congestion for these schemes, and they range between about, scheme options I should say, they range about between 2% and 13% of total peak period congestion. So that's giving you a sense of those impacts and how much it might reduce the overall cost of congestion, at least during the peaks. You might say, well, why isn't it more? And the reason is that, to avoid some of those wider impacts on the rest of Auckland where there are fewer alternatives available, we've kind of narrowed those scheme options to around the city centre. So potentially we could do more, but that would introduce a range of other trade-offs around impact assessment. So at this point we haven't gone there. So short answer is you get a lot better sense of the economic impacts through some further work that we're doing ahead of engagement.
Yeah, it would be helpful, I think, just a bit of advice to do that work and be convinced that you do have a rigorous proof of this, of the ideas you're proposing here. It seems like you've come out with this proposal, this plan, and then you'll find the economic justification somewhere down the track. I think it's probably the wrong way round to make decisions, and in fact under the Local Government Act we're not meant to make decisions like that. Look at section 76 to 78, so I'll leave that aside. The focus seems to be on the city centre, and as it's meant to decrease congestion, are you aware how decongested the city centre has become with, I think, at least $20 million of fines levied on motorists coming down Queen Street, that all the main streets have been narrowed, and in fact the fall off of traffic has been significant, in fact arguably harmful if you talk to the retail sector. So why are you trying to decongest the city centre when actually that seems to be causing economic harm to the vitality of the city centre as once upon a time New Zealand's principal retail district? So is the city centre really congested, or are the motorways congested?
We have done some work looking at real-world conditions around the city centre and fringe, and on the motorways, and we have found that yes, those areas are congested, particularly at the charge points and approaches. Now, turning to the economic impacts on the city centre, there are a range of things going on, and they include obviously post-COVID working from home. I think it's probably made quite a significant change to travel behaviour into the city centre. So, that's another factor that we need to take into account. We will be looking at this with, part of the economic impacts assessment. We'll be looking at potential impacts of these scheme options on businesses, and, you know, including the retail sector within the city centre area. So that's definitely part of the analysis that's to come. But I should say we have done real world testing. The approaches and around the cordons are congested, and so that's one of the reasons that we're looking at the city centre. But also a key driver, as we've said, Aucklanders have consistently said in relation to these schemes that they want great public transport alternatives in place. That's a piece of feedback that you see internationally, so that's one of the reasons that the city centre is also being chosen, because it has that great public transport access.
I think there's some interesting policy decisions that can be made at the next stage as well, because we're very cognizant of the effects that this could have on retail, the nighttime economy, and those kind of policy decisions could be single direction charging, so that anyone driving into the city after, I don't know, 10 a.m. or whatever it may be, does not get charged all the way through the evening. So if there's retail trips that are happening between 8 and 10 a.m. at the moment, yes, they may not be so popular, but anything after that would still be able to access the city centre uncharged.
Thank you. So you don't have any definitive figures of how much this unexplained 2.6 billion cost will be reduced, so that needs to be worked on. In terms of how much revenue you will raise, have you got any idea of that? Because in terms of the three options, there's no figures I can see there, but correct me if I'm wrong. Have you got any rigour around how much each option is likely to produce in terms of this tax, in effect?
We have done initial financial feasibility assessments of these options. And in terms of the revenue levels, yeah, we do have feedback on that. The way that we've done this is to assume that the schemes pay back all of their costs, including financing costs. And what we've said in the report, that for the city centre cordon option, you know, that payback period is going to be quite long, and there's not likely to be much net revenue from that. But for the 3C option, for example, the payback period would be quite short, and the revenue generated from that is going to be, you know, quite significant, potentially in the order of sort of $50 million a year once the payback period has been gone through. But these things are very indicative at this early stage. As I've said, our aim hasn't really been to come from the revenue side. It's been to come from the side of what do we need to charge to reduce congestion and therefore reduce the $2.6 billion of cost. And then, you know, hopefully that's going to provide some net revenue to fund additional public transport improvements and the like out the back of it. And so that's been the approach. It's really been focusing on how do we deliver those congestion reduction benefits. That's the what's in the legislation and the council objective for these schemes.
Okay. So we still a lot we don't know and we need to work on in terms of what the cost reduction will be, the so-called cost, which we accept for point of argument, but we still don't know what the reduction will be, and we still don't know actually, well, we're not being told the actual revenue to be raised. In terms, you mentioned financing costs, and that's the real concern some people would have, because they could see this as a sort of a revenue raiser, not necessarily for the country or the region, the council, but certainly a revenue raiser for the finance sector, who are likely to be, and the IT people and so on, likely to be clipping the ticket, as it were. So what sort of proportion is likely to go in overheads, and what sort of proportion is likely to be payable to the council or to the government, roughly?
Unfortunately, I don't have those figures in front of me. You know, we can provide that later on separately as part of that information. And I should say, though, just as part of this, we do have figures for the extent of congestion reduction. I've said between 2 and 13% in the peak periods. So, you know, some of these schemes are having a very, very material impact in terms of reducing congestion across Auckland. But we can provide you some of the finances at a later date.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Well, another question, in terms, this is going to have some sort of public sanction, and we, all of us understand, especially those who voted for the last 7.9% rates increase, the public is pretty sensitive about these matters, that we have record unemployment, we have a cost of living challenge, and that was before we had the international situation with the war against Iran. There's an equity issue here. We discussed this last time you presented, and it related to Maori, but there is an equity issue here because you're talking about illustrative charges, $4 here, $5 there per trip, which for people in the managerial professional class, not a big deal. And actually, when you think about it, it's people in that particular class who will get those charges reimbursed on their expense accounts. And I dare say even within here, perhaps, they're likely to get their travel costs reimbursed. So it's okay for us to say, but what about the impact on the people who have to use peak time to get to work? And they're the working class people. It may be easy for decision makers to say, well, that's only illustrative and not that much really per trip, affordable for us, not that we'll be paying. Do you think there is an equity issue here, or does this seem to be discriminatory in terms of lower income people are having to pay what is a regressive tax on using the roads they're already paid for? Do you think that's a problem you, and of course as council, if it's willing to go along with this, is going to have to explain? Is that an issue that concerns you?
Oh, absolutely. We need to recognise that introducing a charge is going to impact on some people. However, you know, people are talking about cost of living type issues, but they're also complaining about congestion, unreliable travel, you know, long trips. So, you know, there's a range of things that we are looking to resolve here, and that you in council, or as councillors, elected members, are ultimately going to need to balance. But that's the reason that we are, well, there's a couple of things here. That's the reason that we have focused on the city centre and sort of central Auckland, because that's an area where you have fewer trips by lower income households, so we're mitigating the impacts there already. And then that's why we're asking for engagement with Aucklanders, and we're going to do more work on the social impacts. So ultimately, when the time comes for a final decision, that you as elected members will have the opportunity to weigh the benefits of the scheme versus the social impacts, and you'll be fully informed at that point, because we will have done this initial engagement phase, and then there'll be a full impacts assessment and another round of formal consultation before any final decision. So plenty of opportunities to understand these impacts and get feedback from Aucklanders.
That's right. John? You probably covered this in your workshop, but those two city centre options with the lines, do they incorporate the Victoria Park flyover section of State Highway 1?
No, we should be clear that, that's just representing the cordon. In those options, the motorway isn't anticipated to be charged.
Great. As far as the question that, of benefits, and perhaps that, along the lines that, each city's unique. You mentioned the cities around the world that have done it successfully. A disproportionate number of them are really big cities, way more populous than we are. There are a couple of those Swedish ones that are more a scale of Auckland. Auckland, of course, is incredibly car dependent, and if we compare ourselves to the Australian cities in terms of PT, mode share and that sort of thing. So I just want to explore the notion that perhaps we could be maybe exaggerating a little bit or somewhat the benefits or the sign up to this. So we've basically got an incentive, disincentive kind of regime working that if you want to avoid it, you go into public transport. And I say that because in this last little while, we have had, fuel prices that have gone through the roof, absolutely through the roof. We've still had congestion. So in the areas I live in, there's still huge congestion. Yet the transfer across to PT, and PT has improved, markedly in the last decade, has been relatively modest, given, the coming together of those distinct factors. You would have thought within the last, 3 months, 4 months or whatever, there'd have been a tsunami of people because of basically the same assumption that it's got too expensive and there's still congestion. But that has not occurred, at least it certainly has not occurred in the part of Auckland that I represent. Is there a possibility, therefore, that given our unique characteristics, our history, our tradition of extreme car dependence in a lot of areas, that people won't come across to buses in the numbers that we are anticipating to make this successful?
I think it's important to remember we're looking at fixed periods of time and people respond to those incentives. Our transport network can handle the volumes of people, just not at the peak time that they're travelling at the moment. So by bringing in these timed charges, we are hoping that people will change their behaviour in other ways, whether it's change the time that they drive, change the mode, or maybe not make that trip at all. So I don't think it could be quite compared to a universal uplift in costs, because that you incur those costs no matter what time you travel.
Yeah, that's right. My understanding is there has been an increase in PT over since the period of the fuel price increase, although I'm not sure exactly how much. I think the key difference here is that the actual per trip cost of the fuel and price increase is relatively modest. I appreciate still in total when you go to fill up the tank, it's a big deal. But here with the charging levels that we're talking about, as Graham said, targeted at the peak period and largely focused around the city centre where there's great public transport alternatives, then we would expect to have a significantly bigger impact than the fuel price increase. So, I am confident, and we've seen this. I appreciate that London and Stockholm and New York have better public transport alternatives, but the same basic impact applies, is that if you put a specific charge on a piece of road, you will get people changing their behaviours to either, avoid that charge if that's what suits them, or take the benefit of the time saving. So we would expect some bigger behaviour change than what we've seen out of recent fuel price rises.
Or maybe just pay up because they don't see themselves as having any real viable alternative. And even that goes to people who can't really afford to be paying an extra $50 a week or whatever it is. I guess that's my concern. And again, Auckland is unique, but different parts of Auckland are unique within themselves. So, for instance, the people that are travelling the big distances, their fuel bills have gone up big time, substantially. and I realise, you know, you're dealing with this proposal at this stage, but I would suggest that there are going to be quite some significant iterations around Auckland, and I think particularly of the north, where it does all funnel to the Harbour Bridge, that all these people are going to get caught up at, who are perhaps not going to see themselves as really having a choice, but are going to be paying for it.
That's true. Some people, well, I mean, everybody's got a choice, and it's a case of how practical that choice is, because you can swap mode, time, in terms of your trip. But I think the thing that we always need to recognise is that those that pay will get a significant time saving. You know, from the North Shore, for example, under 3C, where we're charging the motorway, potentially we're talking about, you know, time savings in the order of 12 minutes. Those are really significant time savings. For example, compared to Transmission Gully, $1.25 billion project, that had an estimated time saving of about 10 minutes. So we're talking about the scale of time saving that you would get out of a very major roading investment. So it is quite significant. Yes, people may pay, but they will also get a benefit in return.
Okay, Joe.
Oh, thank you for this. I'm looking at point 10 in the agenda, where it talks about how the benefits are time saving and reliability that will exceed the cost. And I'm wondering if maybe that needs to be qualified. It's a benefit if you've got the money to pay for it, because I am really struggling with this. I really do believe that this is only going to benefit those who can afford it. And I wonder if the modelling or whatever takes into account the working poor, those who are, you know, experiencing poverty. If they don't have the chance to drive outside the charging hours. So I'm really struggling with point 10.
It's a very fair point. The modelling does take into account different income levels and the impacts of the charge on those different income levels. So that's something we're certainly very aware of. We'll be doing more work on that in terms of the social impacts analysis. And, you know, once we get some of that material, as part of the development of whatever the next scheme is we'll be saying, okay, how can we deploy public transport alternatives? What else can we do to address these concerns? But yeah, it is a very real concern, and we're looking to get a better understanding of that, and then work out what we can do to mitigate those impacts as far as possible.
There are options to explore mitigations. Weekly caps might be an example. Someone needs to be in their place of work 5 days a week at a specific time. Maybe a weekly cap makes that more fair, but that's something that will be developed at the scheme board level with advice from yourselves.
Yeah, and just lastly, during the engagement round, I mean, that's essentially, you know, one of the things we want to you know, serve as a foundational point of the conversation that we're having with Aucklanders. You know, specifically, you know, their views on key aspects of time of use charging, but then also, you know, within the individual, you know, shortlisted options, you know, what do they see as the positives, and you know, and some of the disbenefits of those. So I think we'll also learn a lot through that process.
I think it's realistic that the ones that are going to be worse off are not the ones who are going to engage in this process. They're not going to submit on a consultation. So I don't know.
Well, that is partially why we're doing some of the technical analysis. So, you know, that even if we don't necessarily get all of that from direct feedback from the public, we'll still be engaging with the stakeholders, and we'll still be working out, you know, what are the impacts on low-income households, so we can bring that information back to you as decision makers to get a sense of how much does that apply to each of these things. So we're trying to do a full court press on understanding these issues, because we recognise that they are real issues.
If it's okay, is there anything else you're looking at in terms of addressing congestion, or is this what we're trying to think that it will be the
well,
solution?
Today, we're talking about time of use charging as one of the tools in the toolbox. But, you know, as you're aware that there's a whole range of things that council are doing to, council and New Zealand Transport Agency and government are trying to do to address congestion, and that's invest in the likes of City Rail Link, improve bus services, road optimisation, you know, a whole range of those kinds of projects simultaneously, as well as building new roading capacity, cycle lanes, active modes. All of those kinds of things are intended to improve transport performance. So we know that they're going on. We know that they certainly help, but we also know that because Auckland's in the great position of being a growing city, we will see more congestion. So this is one of the reasons that we are putting time of use, at council's direction, putting time of use on the table as something that also would help to address congestion and provide benefits.
One more, is that okay, Mr. Chair? If we support this consultation going out, are we starting a process that we won't be able to stop? You know, like from here, it sounds like this scheme initiation, a scheme board will be appointed. We actually don't make the final decision, do we? A scheme board does, in terms of revenue, how the revenue is spent.
No, sorry, just to elaborate on that. At the scheme initiation stage, where council makes that scheme initiation decision, that's what actually starts the statutory process. So there's an option there that you might not proceed. I think my advice would be that you do take it through to the next step so that there's an opportunity to take all the feedback from the public and see, okay, how can we refine whatever the preferred scheme is to make it work as well as we possibly can and address the concerns that have come up during the engagement phase. And then the public will be consulted on it again formally during the formal public consultation on the final scheme proposal, and that's when everybody can see, right, how well does that final scheme proposal deal with the issues such as impact on low affordability households, how well can we provide public transport and other alternatives, what is the scale of the time savings for drivers who do pay the charge, what is the scale of time savings for others, so you get the full understanding of what the final proposal is, go to the public on that, and then council has a decision to ratify or not ratify that proposal before it goes to the Minister of Transport and the Minister of Finance for final approval. So there are quite a few steps in here where council can stop this process after final engagement, depending on what we hear back from the public. But as I say, we recommend that we at least get through to final public consultation on a proposal so everybody knows, you know, what really are the full costs and benefits of these schemes, what's it going to do to deal with congestion, and can the impacts on low-income households be mitigated?
Okay, thank you. Bo.
Thank you, Josephine. I share your concerns as well. And I guess that leads me on to what my question was about, was the consultation and diving a little deeper into that. I've always got a grave, not a cave, but grave concern around when we're doing consultation and what that looks like. And really what I'd like to know is when we're going out for that consultation, firstly, just to go on from what Councillor Bartley was saying about, say, a particular community or demographic, who is going to give that feedback for them? I know you're saying technical data, but that is still a little bit concerning for me. But the second part of it is when we're going out for consultation, are we saying, do you like this concept or no, and then going into A, B, C, or is it, do you like A, B, or C? Because that's, I have a concern about that. Sorry if I missed that when you made that earlier comment, but I think there's a big difference in asking Aucklanders for feedback from all the different wards and saying, you know, which one do you want, A, B, or C, or do you like this at all to start with, yes or no, and then going down to the preferred option. So Can you just maybe let me know a little bit more about that, please?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And essentially, the parameters that we're thinking about when it comes to structuring that conversation that we want to have with Aucklanders is, and you're quite right, and Graham mentioned this earlier, is it starts with an understanding of the current impact of congestion that Aucklanders are facing. Because although we do have cost of congestion reports and economic data, it's going to be good to start that conversation and actually get that feedback in terms of how Aucklanders are feeling about that. Specifically, when it comes to time of use charging, we do want to ask questions like what are their expectations from a time of use charge if it was instituted, and then to your point, we do also then want to get some feedback on the shortlisted options, and framing it in a way in which, because I think as Graham or as Hamish outlined, there are different trade-offs that come with each of the three options that we're proposing. And essentially what we want to do is have a conversation with Aucklanders about what they see as the opportunities and the challenges when it comes to those three options. We also want insights on things like pricing and equity and mitigations, and to the point earlier, what type of other public transport needs we need to be thinking about and considering as we're putting this together. All told, we then want to create a bit of an insights report that ultimately lays out a bit of context in terms of how Aucklanders are feeling about congestion and how it's impacting quality of life, and then specifically lay out to the committee and to council, from a thematic perspective, what people are thinking about the opportunities and challenges that come with each of the options, so that once we get to that scheme initiation decision, that there's a plethora of insight and feedback to consider, especially when you're thinking about the trade-offs between those three options.
Sorry, to build on that, at this stage, we are wanting to engage Aucklanders on the three options to get their feedback on which of those do they think is best. And then after that, we come back to them with a final option, and it's at that stage to say, do you want it or not, is really to put it simply. Now, part of the reason for that is that based on the international lessons with these schemes, is it probably, as we've said in the report, you're probably going to get back, the feedback is going to be, no, we don't want to pay, right? But what you also see is that support for these schemes builds over time as people get a better understanding. And in fact, once the schemes are in place, they tend to get majority support. So what we want to do is, take Aucklanders through the journey where we get the feedback on, right, how do you think this could work best? People may be concerned, and rightly so, but let's not make a final decision until we've been able to develop up an option that has really addressed the concerns that Aucklanders have raised, and we can say, this is the best scheme to put our best foot forward, here are the costs and benefits, and this is the opportunity for Aucklanders to have that final say late in 2027, and then there's an opportunity for council to make that ratification decision after that, based on the best information about the scheme that we know.
Okay, so just to be clear then, because there's sort of two answers were slightly different, will the question be asked, do you want time of use charging, yes or no?
We're not proposing to do that at the moment. In this engagement, what we would see is that question, perhaps not worded exactly like that, but that occurs in the final formal statutory consultation that occurs, planned for late 27.
But that will only be around that particular option that we've decided on, correct? Just second question, sorry, Chair, is with regards to the technical data and information, what information do you have on the modelling of, because by 2031, the CRL will be well and truly pumping, Eastern Busway and all those other toolkits you're talking about. So what's the modelling data you have to show how much reduction that would already ease on congestion? Because surely if all going to huge success as we're told, that would already reduce quite a lot.
I don't have that precise answer to hand, but the challenge that we face is, as I've sort of been alluding to, is that even though that we continue to put in place these great public transport alternatives and other improvements, Auckland's population continues to increase. So what happens over even the short run, but certainly over the long run, is that additional demand for travel from higher trip numbers means that even with all the great alternatives and capacity that we're putting in place, you still get more congestion. So I'd expect 2031 conditions to be worse than today, even with those trips in place. And the work that we did, on the 2026 cost of congestion assumed that City Rail Link was in place, and you've still got that sort of order of magnitude of $2.6 billion worth of costs with that project in place and doing its thing.
Thank you. Maggie.
Yeah, kia ora. I mean, I can see that the paper recognises social impacts, affordability and the need for mitigation, and I've heard that quite comprehensively in here as well. My question, just to align with everything that's been said, my question is how the consultation will capture those who simply don't have the choice to change when or how they travel, whether that be by way of livelihoods, work, necessity for medical needs, caring responsibilities, or no practical or affordable alternative. It is important that when we understand not only whether this proposal reduces congestion, but that, whether it could create greater hardship or widen existing inequities. This is really critical in this consult process. More so, how will that reality be built into the consultation process and ultimately the design of any scheme taken forward so that we're not solving a congestion issue at the expense of equity across Tāmaki?
I think this it actually speaks to the question from Councillor Burns, which is instead of asking, do you want time of use charging, we're asking, how does each scheme affect you? So if we can understand, are you able to change your behaviour on this scheme? How about this one? What complementary measures, additional bus services, whatever it may be, would help you to change your behaviour with this scheme? It's a much deeper understanding, and that's absolutely where we're aiming to go with this engagement. Add anything?
Yeah, as Graham has said, we want to get a sense of those issues, and as part of the technical work, get a real sense of the scale, how many households are likely to be impacted, because there absolutely will be some households where they have very little choice and very little income, so that the cost will be an impact. We want to get a sense of how big that is, what we can do to mitigate it, and ultimately, in the end, as part of that impacts advice, that'll be one of the trade-off decisions that council elected members, that you will need to make in weighing the final scheme up, and the minister is also going to need to weigh up, because it's a requirement as part of the work of the scheme board. Haven't talked about it, but you need to do formal impacts analysis. So we're going to do some ahead of this initial engagement on 3 options, and then there would be another round of formal impacts analysis in that final public consultation. So we're really looking to have the best information about the scale of those impacts, and as I've said, by selecting schemes that are more focused around the city centre, we're really trying to minimise those options, those impacts as much as possible. For example, I know, South Auckland is not the whole thing, but really the proportion of people that pay, for example, from South Auckland is generally much lower than the average. It may be in the order of 2-3%. So, we're already trying to mitigate those impacts as far as possible.
Thanks, Hamish. I'm really getting a sense of that in this discussion. What is important to me is that when it does come back and the findings, how they're being built into the proposed solution, Because if there is considerations that need to be in there, such as exemptions for urgent medical needs or whatever it is, we want to see how those are being woven in to what we're proposing here. Because what we're hearing constantly here is addressing a congestion issue. But what we don't want to do is do it at the cost of increasing the inequity across Tāmaki. So this is as much about how you guys then present the solution to us moving forward, how you take that information, and how you ensure that any steps forward address all of those concerns that we're hearing across this table. Thank you.
Thank you. Morris.
Yeah, look, just want to explore two areas. First of all, pricing mechanisms. They're the best mechanism there is to change behaviour and have people alter what they do. But they're only good if people can change. If you just stick a mechanism in place that says if you breathe the air, you'll get a fee, but if you don't, you'll be all right, that doesn't really work because everyone's got to do it. So electricity charges, airfares are a really good one. I know a lot about how you change demand by day to try to keep putting the fares up if there's too much demand, or drop them back if you need to attract people. But the problem I think you got with the public is that I was just looking at 12 minutes savings would be a $5 value to somebody who was on the minimum wage. So to them, even if they could save 12 minutes, and we're not talking of 12-minute savings in some of what I'm reading here, but if you're a tradie charging $80 an hour, it's $16 you could afford to pay for that time and still be better off for it. So that's going to be the first difficulty of how you explain to people what it will mean for them and the impact it has on them. But can I ask you a few specific questions? Because that guaranteed sort of outcome, if you're paying some sort of a pricing signal charge, is really important. Do we have any information from other systems or what we're planning on this? What happens if you don't get the savings? What if you're charging people through the gantry a specific sum of money and the road is just as bloody blocked and stopped as it was when you weren't charging them? Do you stop the charging immediately and say that charging didn't go that day because there was an accident on the motorway and everyone was bloody blocked and stopped for much more than normal? Or do you just charge them that no matter what?
A couple of things here. I mean, the legislation has provisions that, you know, as the scheme board comes close to finalising the scheme, we'll be setting target outcomes in terms of level of service and all the rest of it, and a whole measuring and performance framework. So there'll be a sense of, are we achieving, or is the scheme achieving what its objectives are? Now,
I'm more interested, and if it's not?
And if it's not, then there's a decision need to be made as to what you do to address that, and the legislation provisions would trigger that decision. So you might, you know, one decision may be to increase the charge, one decision may be to abandon the thing, you know, and that's the potential range.
Okay.
A key point here, though, is it's probably 6 months to a year before you can really say what the impact is of the charge. So you've got to let it bed in so people can start to adjust. You know, whatever happens on day one is not going to be the final outcome. We're going to need to give it some time, and I'll be frank and say we're probably not going to get this perfect, you know, because it's a tough thing to estimate even with the best modelling in the world. So there is a bedding in period, there'll be a refinement period, but then basically the way the statute works is that the scheme board will need to make a call how to address it if it significantly wasn't working.
Yeah,
and no
I mean,
doubt.
Hamish, that's my point though. If you're putting a charge in place like a toll, then you're just paying it no matter what, and pay up and shut up. But if you're putting a pricing signal in place which says we want you to change your behaviour and do things differently, and people still encounter, even if it's for the first year, there'll be almost a screaming match from the public if you've gone and shoved this bloody thing in and all it was a revenue raiser.
Absolutely. And no doubt that from all involved, there would be, some significant pressure to address that outcome.
But the way to sell that, though, would be to say to them there will be an escape mechanism that automatically triggers if, in fact, it's not doing its job. And we can assure you that this will be all off the table immediately if after a period of X months we don't see Y percentage of time travel difference. Can I ask you just some specifics here? Do you have any information in two cohorts, really? One, comparable cities, because there's only a few that are really ever comparable. Every city's different. And then a second cohort for the whole number of cities that have done it. And I'll go through them. Do we know what percentage changed the time of their trip? Do we know what percentage changed the route they would take in order to avoid the charge? Because one of the problems I've seen elsewhere in the world, you've driven rat running right into the suburbs and killed unbelievable amount of anger from people living in a residential street that have got nothing but cars pouring down their road because of the pricing. The third one is, do we know what changed their mode? How many people elsewhere did actually move to public transport? And that's got to be a difficult one to use as a benchmark because it'll relate to how good the public transport on offer was. Fantastic public transport like in London. Why the hell would you use your car if you can use the tube anytime you like? The number 4 one is, what percentage just live right on the verge of one of those charging rings? And if they turn around the end of their street, they're caught, and if they turn back the end of the other street, they're not. Because I found that it's whenever you've got those lines in the sand and people are just on the edge of them, it's really hard to justify why they're paying something compared to someone who's coming all the way in from Howick and used the road that entire time. And then the last one is, what percentage didn't make a change at all? What people just said, I can't, I won't, or I'll just have to pay. Because I think knowing that is a lot, those 5 different categories, time of trip, the route they use, whether they do rat running or so on, the mode of transport they use, those that are right on the very cusp of the changes being in or out, and then how many didn't. I think the public need to know that when they're being consulted, because I tell you right now, I know this stuff pretty well, and I don't know the answers to that. I've got guesstimates, but I don't know. And if it turns out that the vast percentage of people don't make a change but just end up paying it, that will in itself look like we're just putting an extra charge in place and will be hard to sell. So, I mean, I just think if we could get some more specifics from research about how this has worked, it would make it a lot easier to sell to people. And by the way, if anyone's interested, I'm really a big fan of the number 3 option and the whole motorway thing. I think doing little wee cordons around the city centre makes no sense whatsoever. Just my view.
That information is certainly available for London, Stockholm, New York, and a couple of other things. So we can find that and present it as part of the engagement. I think
It'd be good to know. And how long it's been running for, you see.
Yep.
You know, like if they only just put it in last year, it won't make much difference. But if they've been up and running for a 10-year period, and this is what the long-term change occurred, by mode, by time of day of week, or not at all, or whatever, then you can say, well, that's a damn good proposition to be offering someone for their pricing signal payment, as opposed to made no bloody difference and all you're doing is just charging me more money for no benefit.
Yeah, that's right. So we'll have the international evidence, but we're also trying to produce that same evidence in an Auckland context out of the model, so we can give people a sense of what that story is. And there you can see, for example, under that core motorways option, you know, we're expecting 7% of people to be charged. I don't have the travel reduction in this set of stats. It's around about 2%. But, you know, in terms of the swap there, that's a 7% increase in public transport use. And to give you some context, that's roughly like adding the ferry network to the scale of the increase in public transport that you get out of this. So we can.
Can I just say to you that for me as a ward councillor way out east, where we don't have a train system and we don't have state highways and all that sort of stuff, one of the problems I have with constituents is we don't have, in fact, when we did all the walkable catchment stuff in Plan Change 120, huge chunks of our suburbs were outside of even a walkable catchment to a bus. And so everyone will say to me, well, so bloody hell, you tell me I can catch public transport. How do I do it from here? I tell them you can walk for 3/4 of an hour in the rain and catch a bus, you'll be fine. It doesn't work. So I agree with you. If you're living down one of the rail corridors or on the Eastern Bus Corridor or whatever, then you've got to, I mean, as I keep telling everybody, I lived in London for 2 years and never owned a car because the tube was just brilliant. You never use anything but it. But you've got to have that option. And for big chunks of Auckland, they're outside of walkable catchments to public transport. What do you say to them?
Well, one of the key things that we're saying is that that's why we've focused on options in the city centre, where there are those better public transport options, and then for those who are, travelling on the motorway and on those core motorways and paying the charge, well, you're getting a significant time saving, and it's up to those people to judge. Well, what's that worth to me? Knowing also that. By doing this, that there are going to be wider benefits to other Aucklanders from the overall impacts of the scheme.
Okay.
So there's an overall plus for the region as a whole here.
Yeah, okay. It's the difference between the theory and what might turn out to be the practice.
Okay, no further questions. Thank you, gents. I'm going to move this. Shane's going to second it. Now, Ken, do you want to present your amendment?
Yes, please, if I may. If it can be put up.